Right, with that said, welcome everyone to this meeting on using Microsoft Teams. Now, I'm sure you've all had some experience with Microsoft Teams. If you have never had any experience with Microsoft Teams, you are in Microsoft Teams right now, and you are experiencing the webinar aspect of Microsoft Teams. What we asked you to do when you join this session is to just complete a quick Mentimeter, which allows us to get some feedback on your thoughts of what Microsoft Teams actually is. Now, before we look at that Mentimeter, actually, I think now would be an appropriate time to look at it. Right. So the question we asked was a very simple one, and that is, what do you think Microsoft Teams is? Now, have a look at the answers that we've actually got in front of us there. I'm just going to switch off my camera. It'll save us all a little bit of bandwidth. And just before we dive into that, sorry, I completely forgot to introduce myself. My name is Jaco van Niekerk. I'm one of the e-learning advisors in the Cape Winelands, and Gilbert is going to be assisting us in the chat. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat. I will try my best to monitor it as well on my side and see if there are any important questions. Please note the way that we've set up this meeting, you will not be able to unmute yourself and you will not be able to present as well. So if you have questions, you feel free to ask them. You can use the raise your hand function. Then we have the opportunity to unmute you if there's a question that you would like to pose to ask us over your microphone. So use that functionality as well. But to get back to where we were, what is Microsoft Teams? Now, I see if we look at the answers that we've got here, we say it's a meeting tool, it's used for collaboration, reliable service, virtual interaction, online meetings, video conference, meeting, virtual meetings, virtual convenience, Zoom, webinars, video conferencing, collaboration, communication, meeting, conference. That seems to be the predominant message that we're getting here. There's more people that are coming in with their responses, but the key thing, the one thing that seems to be running throughout your comments on this is it's a webinar tool. It's a tool that we use for virtual meetings. It's a tool we use for online interaction. But the thing that we want to establish today, and that's the underlying message of this entire session, is that it is so much more than just this webinar virtual tool that we've got. We've all come to get used to or learn more about Teams out of necessity. We needed a tool to communicate with each other, and then Teams came along. And instead of figuring out all the different little elements of Teams, all of us just managed to dive straight into the video conferencing aspect of it, which is a fantastic tool. It's a very, very powerful part of Microsoft Teams. But I think it's important to understand that Teams, to a certain extent, is just the logical next evolution of communication. Now, this tool that we are using now, for those of you who are interested, it's called Mentimeter. It's a great little tool to add a little bit of interaction from your audience. Please don't close it, because what I would like to do, we're going to move on to the next slide, and we're going to pose another question to you. So I see there's 16 people on it. And I'm going to ask you, what do you actually use Microsoft Teams for? Now, we've got an understanding of what Microsoft Teams actually does, but let's ask the question, how do you actually use Microsoft Teams? So think about that for a second, and then just respond. You'll see if you open it up in a tab, the question will have changed. If you didn't know a mobile device, that would have popped up. So see if you can answer that question quickly. How do we use Microsoft Teams? Meetings and chat. Right, there's one very definite use of it, of course. And please, you do not need to write a long essay about how you use Teams. Just quickly and briefly tell us what you use Teams for. I'd also like to point out now, while you're trying to type these messages, Microsoft Teams, well, we've got a lot of our district officials on this in this session as well. We're also going to have a look at how we want to extend the use of this, because today's session really is an important session for all of us to look at and to understand the implications of how we can use Teams. Meetings, training, interaction with specific groups, virtual meetings, and sharing information or revisiting information. I like that answer. There's a couple of key things that were pointed out there: to conduct meetings or a chat form, to communicate, nog nie begin gebruik nie, to watch webinars and interact with people in a safe way. So I think we're going to get the same kind of feeling here: to join meetings, to send information to my colleagues. So I think we're getting a similar sense. I see Nicholas has said in the chat that you use it for online classes. Lena has mentioned they use it for interviews, teaching tutor classes. So there's the dominant thing that we see here with the response is kind of the same as we had in the previous one. It's still focusing a lot on the webinar aspect, the virtual meeting aspect, this side of it, which again, I think is an important thing to realize that is part of it, of what we do. But when we actually use Teams beyond that, that's when Teams becomes an incredibly powerful tool. Now, if you joined the session today because you want to learn how to do webinars a little bit better, I'm sorry to say, but we're not really going to look at that. We're going to quickly look at how we can set up meetings. That's true, but we're not going to look at the little details of how to present and how to do that, to make that whole process a little bit more efficient. We're really going to get to the meat and the bones of what can Teams do beyond just these virtual meetings that we know it for. And before we can get to that, a very simple question, and I actually forgot to set this up. I wanted to add a poll question here. Let's use a quick raise your hand feature. In Teams, you'll see there's a little icon which allows you to raise your hand. And this is now specifically for the teachers and not just so much the district officials. Please use the raise your hand if you've logged into Teams other than when you had to join a virtual meeting. I'm going to give you a minute. I promise you we'll stop with all the interaction there. So there's 2 people who've done it. 3. Please note we've got 93 people in attendance. So typically we would think there's going to be a lot of other people. Right, I think there's about 10 or so of you who've raised your hand. 12, 14. The number is growing slowly. So there's a couple of us who've actually logged in to Teams before, other than just to use it when you had to join a meeting. It might have been you logged in because you wanted to find the meeting that you had to join, or whatever the case might be. But before we can actually use Teams effectively, right? So thank you. I think we're done with the hand raising. So please just put down your hands again, and if you don't, Gilbert, if you don't mind, just to lower their hands as well. So before we can do anything else, you have to understand that you can log into Teams, and that's going to bring us back to something that I think we've been trying to push from the e-learning side, and that is the use of your WCG Schools login credentials. If you don't know how to log in with your WCG Schools login credentials, we'll as part of the email that we're going to send to all attendees, we'll add that. And I know the invite to this one also had instructions of how to use that. But step number 1, if you actually want to start using Teams, is actually managing to get to Teams. There's a number of different ways to get to it, but I'm going to show you what I believe is the easiest way to get to it, right? So in any browser, and I'm just using my the Edge Chromium browser for this instance. All you need to do is you need to enter the address office.com, right? So that is where we want to go, office.com. Once you get to office.com, it's going to ask you to log in. Now, in my instance, as you can see, I've actually already logged in here. Let me just quickly log out, then I'll show you how this process works. So I'm actually logging in with my WCG Schools account, just to show the teachers how this part works. Very often, if you've logged in and you'll stay logged in, then it's a much easier process when you're signing in. You saw now with mine, when I opened office.com, immediately I was signed in. So the sign-in process isn't something you have to do over and over again. But the first time when you log in, you simply go to office.com, you say sign in, it's going to open up. I'm just going to say, no, I don't want to remember it. I'm going to enter my password, and there we go. If you're logging in with a WCG Schools account, you are probably going to be asked to do the two-step authentication. That is when it sends you an email. It can either send you an SMS or Microsoft can call you. Either way, they use your mobile number as a two-step verification. Again, that's a process that doesn't have to happen over and over again. As you saw now, I've already logged in. Now, when I get to this landing page on office.com, it can take me to all the various tools, but we are actually only interested in going into Teams today. So you can either go straight to the little icon there at the bottom. Let me just make it a little bit bigger, the Teams icon, or we can click on the waffle, which is in the top left, and you'll see here I've got my various tools, one of them being Teams. And if I click on Teams, it takes me to the web app. Now, for today's purposes, I'm going to be using the web app specifically and not the refresh it, and not the desktop app, just simply because I need to use the desktop app to present the session. So that's why I'm using the web app to show you how it works. And now, of course, it has all sorts of silly little issues. This is now because I signed out. Let me just quickly go through this process again. Right, now, regarding the web app and the desktop app, this is really personal preference. I like to keep everything native in one location, so I tend to use the web app more than I use the desktop app. But and now today it doesn't want to work for us. So just give me a second. I just want to open up, get a different app option open here for us. This is a new issue that I haven't really seen before. Okay, just give me a second. I'm just going to change my presentation to something else. Right. So apologies for that. I'm not entirely sure why it wanted to do that. So here we go. What I'm showing you here, this is Microsoft Teams. What you see in front of you is my Western Cape .gov.za team. Now your team will look similar to, or what you'll get on your side is going to be the same, except if you're logging in with a guest account. Now we're going to get back to the guest account and what exactly the guest account entails a little bit later. But first and foremost, we just needed to know how to log into Teams. And again, I apologize for that error. I haven't really seen that happening before. But the easiest way, go to office.com, log in with your credentials, and then you go to Teams. And I highly recommend bookmarking it. So in my instance, you'll see here at the top, I've got a whole number of different bookmarks that I use. This is my Microsoft Teams one. It's right next to my Gmail and my Outlook. As I said, I like to keep things native in one app. So I do everything through Google Chrome, really. And there I have my Microsoft Teams, very easy to access. Right. So if I'm in Teams, the first and one of the most important things that we need to know is how do we actually create a team? How do we join teams? And how do we use this to our advantage? What are these teams? Now, in a sense, what you can think of when we think of teams is a team is like a group that you are creating, a group that you can use to communicate, that you can use to collaborate in different ways. And we also need to understand the functionality of what a team actually does. So just to start off, we're just going to create our first team. So once you get to this point, you'll see there's a button here at the top, in the top right, that says join or create team. So we're first going to show you how you create a team. So we click here at the top, create team. There's a number of different options. Let me explain what these different options actually mean. The first one I think is pretty self-explanatory. This is how we create a team. The second one we says join a team with a code. One thing that you have to understand about joining the team with a code, this is locked to an organization only. So in other words, if you are using your westerncape.gov.za account like I'm using now, I won't be able to join your WCG schools group team using a code. If I'm going to enter the code, it's going to tell me invalid code, or I might end up in the wrong team, or that might be the case. And this again is why we want to get our teachers to move towards the WCG schools environment. From this WCG schools environment, what happens now is you create a closed environment where you can create things like public teams. So this team, as you can see, created by my colleague Gilbert, this is a WCG Teams test. It's a public team, so everyone in the organization can see it. Now, be careful, because in the WCG schools environment, that means all teachers in the Western Cape. So you don't really want to create these public teams. Just be careful of that, except if it's something that you would like all the teachers to have access to. Then you just need to be a little bit careful of creating a team like that. So that's how we can join these public teams, and you'll see there are 2 public teams over here. So when we create a team, first and foremost, let's click on create team. There's a number of different options here. You'll see there's class, professional learning community, staff, and other. Now, for the purposes of today's training, we're not going to look at teams as a tool that you're going to get your learners into. We're only going to look at teams as a tool for internal communication, right? So this can be internal communication in the sense of you're going to create a team for your school. You can create a team and from the subject advisor's point of view, they can create a team for their subject, etc., etc. Different ways that we can go about creating this. We can create professional learning communities, and this is again great because it's not locked into a school only. I'll take an example. Some schools are using have their own tenants running, their own Microsoft tenant or their own Google tenant, which creates a school-based environment, which doesn't really. Well, sometimes it's a little bit more tricky to set up the required trust relationship between schools and people outside of the organization. Again, that's why the WCG schools account is a very useful one, because we're all automatically on the same account. So we're just going to look at a very simple one. We're just going to use the staff one. So if I click on staff, there's a couple of questions. It's going to ask me first, what do I want to name my team? We're just going to call this the demo team. And here I can add a description. It's optional. I don't have to add the description. And here, private only team owners can add members, so I can decide who joins this. This is the public one. And again, I'm a little bit hesitant to advise you to use the public one, because the public one can become a little bit there's so many people that will have access to it. So I suggest creating a private one. And here at the bottom, you've got the create a team using existing team as a template. This is quite useful if you want to make a copy of another team, because then it'll automatically create similar channels, etc., etc. Although you have to ask yourself, if I'm creating a copy of the team, can't I just put more people into that original team? And there's also another option that I don't think will really be set up for WCG schools. So here we're going to go to just creating a demo team. I've created my demo team. And once I get to this point, now I need to add people to my team, right? So what's great about using the Active Directory that you've got set up on WCG schools, all the teachers, once you start typing in one of your colleagues' names, it'll automatically appear. So in this instance, let me just go here. Here's my colleague. I'm going to add him. I'm going to add Harriet, another colleague of mine. I'm going to add Janine. And as you can see, these names just automatically appear. I don't need to go and find out what their email addresses are. They automatically appear when I'm adding names. And the same applies for the WCG schools. Now, for WCG schools, what's going to happen is, again, it opens up the possibility to add any of the teachers in the Western Cape who have these accounts. So as long as you know your colleagues' names and surnames, it's actually very easy to add them to these groups. Remember, this is the one option. I'll show you another option now once we've created the group. But if I now want to add an external person, so I want to add someone from WCG schools, let's use my account. So what happens here is it actually remembers my WCG schools account simply because I have contacted this one in the past. Normally, that would not be the case. So if I want to, I'm trying to remove it here. So let's say I wanted to invite my colleague on his Gmail account, Gilbert. It's not his Gmail account, I'm just making it up. So here, what happens here is I add him as a guest. Now we're going to talk about what this guest access means when we get to the end of the session, because it's important. It's really important to understand the relation between people that are on the domain and people that are guests of the domain, because they have very different functions that they can, very different roles and permissions and things that they can use. Right. So let's just add all of these people. They're going to be added to the team. So they will now get an email that tells them you've been asked to join the team. So here, I think it just says we ran into an issue because the account possibly doesn't exist. But as you can see, the ones that are actually part of my organization, very easy to add them. When I get to this point, another thing that's important to keep in mind is I've got the option to decide what kind of role do I want to give them in the team. So I can decide that I'm going to make Janine an owner of the team, which means that she's got certain permissions and rights in the team that the other two won't have. Right? For this purpose, let's make all of them owners, just so that everyone has the same rights in this example team that we're going to make. Right. So now I'm going to close, and I've got my new team set up and ready to go. Once you create this team, there will be a couple of generic things that open here at the top. Posts and files are the two most important ones. In next week's session, we're going to look at these tabs and how you can really use these tabs to your advantage. And something that I always joke about, and my colleagues and the others at the district office will know this. I am very much a pro Google person. I really enjoy the Google platform and everything that offers. However, in Teams, there are functions that work a lot better than the alternate that you've got on the Google platform. But next week, what we're going to show you is we'll show you how we found a way to make the two work together to get the most out of both. And that's the way that we do it now. Despite the fact that I am very much pro Google, Teams is one of the first things that I open up. As you'll see at the top, I think this is a kind of a great way of showing how these different ones interact, or what I use a lot. Teams is very, very high up on my list of things that I like to access very quickly and easily. Right, so when it comes to bulk importing and adding guest team members, I see Yaroslav has asked a question. The simple answer to that is unfortunately no. There's no easy, quick way to add bulk to add a lot of people to a team. The only way to do it is to go and type their names one by one. And this is for guests. This is why the guest thing can sometimes be a problem. If you want to add bulk people to your team, that's when the team code becomes quite useful. So let's see quickly what that implies. Once I've created my team and actually want to get people to join my team, the first thing that we need to do is to add people. Remember, when we started the team, it asks me add a couple of people, but now we want to add some more people. So we go to more options and we go to manage team. And there's also this option, get link to team, which you can again send out to. This is one of the easiest ways to do it. However, again, the same thing applies to the link as applies to the code. this link doesn't work when you're trying to add guests. As far as we know, I haven't tested this in depth yet, but as far as I know, when you send these links out, they're not going to be able to add themselves to the group. You have to add guests manually. So if you send the link out and people are using the same domain, for example, the WCG schools, then they'll jump into your team very quickly and easily. So the alternative to this is when we go to manage team, it takes us to this page where we see all of the different people that we've got over here. And then if we go to settings, there you can share this team code. Now remember, when we created the team the first place, and I'll go back to that place in a minute, we can actually join teams by using a code. And this is probably the quickest and the easiest way to get people to join your team. If you have, if everyone is using the same organization, ask them to open up Teams, logged in with their WCG schools account, and then just give them the code. So if you need to get your entire staff onto a team and you are 30, 40, 50 members at the school, you do not have to enter the email addresses one by one. Tell them to go into Teams, tell them to join the team and give them the code. And then everyone gets into the team quickly and easily without really struggling. Alternatively, you can send them that link that I showed you that you can send out to multiple people. In your settings, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but here you can, yes, that code that Gilbert has just shared, unfortunately, this is accessible to all our Western Cape.gov.za colleagues, but it's not going to be accessible to our to the teachers who have joined us on their WCG schools accounts. Now, when we go to channels, and we're not going to talk about channels in detail, but channels is how we can redirect communication within a team. I think we'll create one channel just to give you an idea of how it works, and then we'll talk about, we are going to talk about channels at length in next week's session when we look at the slightly more advanced functionalities within teams, the communication in teams. But this is just simply how, based on how we actually get people onto our team. You can change the picture. So if we want to change our demo team picture, you can upload a picture if you want to, or you can just use one of the stock ones. Let's just use this one of Shakespeare. I'm assuming they're trying to show Shakespeare there. So they have changed my picture. I suggest giving pictures to your teams because it really makes it easier. It's a visual kind of way of knowing which teams we're going, which teams we need to access where, right? So there I've added my picture, I've changed that. And we can, of course, manage teams. There's a whole bunch of different things that we can change in here. If we go back to the settings, we can decide the member permissions. What do we want to actually allow them to do? What can they do? Are they allowed to do basically anything that they want in this channel, or are we going to limit their access? Guest permissions, what are we going to allow guests to actually do? In our team, again, guests have automatically by default, they have different permissions. You'll see I've got member permissions and guest permissions. That means everyone outside of the organization is automatically a guest. Now, one of the other things that you can actually switch on and off, the fun stuff, if you don't want people to be posting gifts all the time, if you don't want them to use stickers, etc., you can turn off all of those things and turn them on as much as you want. So there's a lot of control that you can have in the team. Now, once I've got the team, what is the whole point of creating a team? Well, it's simple. It's communication. That is the key thing that we want to be able to do in our team, is to communicate and to communicate effectively. Now, for that reason, we want to look at how these conversation tools actually work. If I click on new conversation, this little dialog pops open here. But what I want to recommend you to do, and this is just a default thing you should really get yourself used to doing, if you are starting a new conversation, and this only applies to a new conversation, is to click on the first little icon over here that calls itself format. You'll see once I click on this, it expands my post and it adds a very important part to it that I think really makes sense to add to all of it, and that is the ability to add a subject line to a conversation. Now, just to explain quickly what this conversation thing is supposed to be, what makes this different than just a chat, because I think we are all very used to using WhatsApp to send quick communication messages, or we are used to using Signal, the other option that some people use, Telegram, other people use, or emails, of course. But one of the greatest advantages of using chat in this way, starting a new conversation, is that you open it up for multiple people to respond like you would on WhatsApp. However, the difference is you can group the conversation. So in other words, when we are talking about multiple things at a time, and I'm sure you experienced that before, there's a discussion about something on WhatsApp and you've got 20 messages on that, and then someone starts with a new discussion and there's 20 messages on that, and in 3 or 4 days time it's just impossible to find what people said. It becomes an absolute nightmare to navigate. Yes, there's functionality that adds that you can star messages, you can do all sorts of little things, but fundamentally it's just, that's not what WhatsApp was designed to do. It's got some ways of doing it, but it doesn't do it well. Teams was designed to be a communication tool. The webinar function that we all know was actually something that was built in, yes, from the beginning, but it wasn't the main use of Teams. The whole webinar functionality just exploded last year due to the situation that we found ourselves in. So it wasn't the primary function of Teams. This, what I'm showing you now, was the primary function of Teams, was to be a communication tool, replacing emails, replacing WhatsApp messengers, replacing things like that. That was a real function of Teams. So that's what we need to explore, how that works. So in this instance, I'm just going to add a subject. So this is my welcome. It won't replace emails. It's extending the functionality of emails, if I could say it that way. Yes, we still want to be able to send emails, but this can do a little bit more than just sending an email, which is actually incredibly useful and powerful. So I'm going to start my conversation by saying welcome to Teams, and I'm going to just say welcome to our brand new demo team. Now, here up top, you'll see there's a whole bunch of different ways that I can format it. So to kind of draw attention to certain things, it's always useful to use some of these things. These are things that you will find in any kind of word editor. You can say, we can bold demo, we can change the brand to an italics, we can underline something here. Oh, sorry, we won't be able to change the subject lines formatting. It immediately jumps to under that. So our subject line has a default formatting. I'll show you now once we post it. So yeah, I've got those basic things that I want to do. I can change font color, I can change the font size. All of these different formatting tools have been incorporated. Now, one of the things that I think we also would like to show you how to do, which is an area of concern that we sometimes struggle with, is often what happens is when we send links, we just change everything into a bit.ly. We are so used to changing things into bit.lys that we're not always sure when we should change it into bit.ly and when we shouldn't change it into bit.ly. So what I'm going to show you now just quickly is a simple little trick that you can use when sending emails, when sending any of these kind of more interactive type of things that you say. So let's say make sure to sign the attendance register. Now, normally what we would do is then we would go and we would either go and paste an incredibly long link. So there's a very long link that we can add, or we'll just add a bit.ly because this is what we're used to doing. But something that actually makes even more sense is changing our text into links. So once I've selected text, I can use this little link button over here. It says insert link, and it shows here text to display. And now instead of having a bit.ly, I just add the full link here. Remember with bit.ly, what's actually happened. With bit.ly, what's actually something that we picked up some people are struggling with. So insert. is that, but there's sometimes an issue accessing Bitly's. So this is a much more safe way of making sure that people are able to access your content, because then you know there's a link. Now, I'll probably, rather than saying make sure to sign the attendance register, I would probably rather say something like click here to sign the attendance register. I'll select it. I'll go to the insert link. I'm going to go and insert the link over there as well. And then to just make sure they actually see it, make it bold, change it to large, and there we go. Suddenly I've got a link that really stands out and people can't miss that. And I'm sure everyone agrees it looks better than that very long, clumsy link. And this applies especially when we get to Microsoft Teams meetings and have the longest links imaginable. So this is just a simple little trick that you can use. Instead of having to use Bitly's for everything, rather do it this way around. Make it a clickable text, a hyperlink, and it just displays a little bit better. And you know it's not actually going through Bitly systems all the time, which we don't really want to happen all the time. So here I've got my simple post. I can actually decide, am I going to let people reply to this message, or I'm just going to say it's only you and moderators can reply. Now remember, moderators are essentially the other owners of the whole session. I'm going to send my message. Now I'm going to hope that one of my colleagues, either Gilbert or Harriet or Janine, who've actually joined my group, they can respond to my message, and so that we can show you what the reply part of this actually looks like. Now, while they're trying to reply to the message, I'm going to show you a different way that you can also actually, there we go, Gilbert's added. Thanks for adding me to the team. Now, in response to this, I can reply to him and say, pleasure. They'll add pleasure, and you've got all sorts of little tools here that you can add. You can add your attachments. This is the attachment icon. I can add an emoji. I can add a GIF if I wanted to, these custom stickers, etc. I'm going to get to this meet now option in a second, etc. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can do. And then I'll send it. Now, what's nice about this is you can actually see there's this little button that says collapse all. So if I click collapse all, it actually takes this message away. Now I've got a topic line, welcome to the teams, which is not very well written out. Welcome to the teams, and I can, if I want to see the conversation, I can open it up. But I can have multiple conversations happening and find the actual conversation and the messages quickly and easily. If I don't actually want to reply to him, I can just simply click on his message and just add whatever message I want to. Excuse me, add here, just a thumbs up. I agree, for example. If you can see the way that this adds to the collaboration element of what we can do, it really works incredibly well. And now you'll see immediately what happened here at the top. While we were talking, I've got this little bell icon with the one in the red circle showing me there's some activity. Now that it becomes an incredibly, the more you use Teams, the more important this becomes. Because if I click on the activity, it actually shows me all the different things that are happening on my Teams. And I can scroll and I can see all the various things that are actually happening. And it'll take me straight to where I need to go. Actually opens up this thing for me. So just to go back to my team, here we are in the demo team again. Now, a different type of conversation that we can actually have, if I click on new conversation, something that also looks quite nice. If you click on format, you'll see there is a drop down here that says conversation. Now you can change this to an announcement if you wanted to. The only real difference between the announcement and the conversation is the fact that you've got this type of headline. So it gives you a bigger, bolder heading that you can add. And here you can say bigger, bolder heading. And I can change, if I just simply want to have a color, because this is already really going to grab someone's attention, you can just change the color, of course, or if you wanted to, you can upload an image, or you can just choose an illustration, something that's there already. And we're going to add the purple dragon background because no one's going to miss a purple dragon. And here I say, this is another post, and yay. Now, Here's a little function that we will look at in more detail next week as well, when we say post in multiple channels. Because for us, this becomes quite useful, the e-learning component. We've got multiple groups where we've got e-learning channels, and we don't want to have to post a message, copy and paste everything all the time. So we just select the post in multiple channels, and it just goes across teams. It can post in any channel that we've got posting privileges in. Again, very useful way of doing this. This is another post, yay, and there we go. And you'll see this is a much bigger, bolder post that I've got over here, and it automatically has this little icon over here that tells me it is an announcement. I can collapse this because that is not so important anymore. And something else that becomes quite a useful feature is the ability to pin something. Now, this means it is the first thing that people will see when they open the team, regardless of what else has been posted. Just makes things a little bit nicer to navigate if once you've got lots of conversations, lots of messages happening. Right, again, activity, let's see what happened this time. And Gilbert just simply liked it. And he's added a lovely little sticker here. It looks nice. Okay, so can you see how this becomes a very powerful, useful, and useful tool for communication within the team? Now, what we can do beyond the team is we can also send private chats, which is another very important and useful way to communicate, because we don't always want to have everything that we're saying broadcast like this. Because remember, anyone who's in our team will now see this big bold heading and then the green crayon that Gilbert has posted there. But maybe we would prefer to have a personal chat about this. Now, there are a number of different ways that you can go about doing this. The quickest way to actually get to a personal chat is to just simply click on a person's face, and it'll take you to this part where it keeps on wanting to run away, where I can start the chat, or I can go to, okay, we're not going to go to that point. It gives me the email address, in this instance, the phone number in your WCG schools. It won't give you all of these details, but it gives me a little bit more detail. So if I click on him, I can quickly go into the chat with Gilbert, which I'm not going to do now because of the simple fact that there's a long conversation that's happened there already. Let me just check here on another side if there's anything that I really need to hide there. Not that we need to hide anything. Okay, so let me start a chat with some. Okay, I'm going to show you quickly what it looks like because I don't see there's much there that we shouldn't show. So I think this is a useful way for you to also see how the two of us often communicate. If I just go to the chat here and I'll go to our direct chats, you'll see there's a whole bunch of different messages that we're sending to each other. Very often what the two of us do is we use this to send links to one another. If you need to send a link to someone quickly. So you'll actually see here's our registration link, the Mentimeter link. Here's a video that Gilbert sent to me that he said I should have a look at. And here's just a couple of other links. So this is a very quick way for us to actually send messages to one another. What I would also like to show you is how you start a conversation with someone in a different way, because I know this was something that I often struggled with. Where on earth do I find the chat icon? So that was quite easy, finding chat over there. Something that I want to show you quickly. If we're in Teams, just to show you when it becomes functional. So there's a whole bunch of different teams. Here you can have a look at the e-team that we have over here. This is where we do all of the majority of our communication happens through this, and we've got a whole ton of different channels that we have. And you'll see again, here's the topics that we need to use, that we can easily jump between topics. We also don't always use it the way that it should be used, and we are working on getting better at it, of course. And then, of course, we've got our FET components, GET component, foundation phase component, etc., etc. All these different teams have already been set up. These are the ones that we often, or that we use when we are communicating. But the private chat, if I want to send a message to someone privately, finding that icon can sometimes be a little bit tricky because it's not easy to just spot the new message. If I click on chat over here in the corner, you'll see there's something that says new chat, or Alt-N if you want to use the shortcut. If I click on new chat, it opens up a blank chat where I can now enter someone's name. Again, it's going to refer to what's going to happen now is it's going to open up. It's going to recall some of the names that are in the Active Directory. So, for example, if I'm going to enter some of my other colleagues, Lucy Olivier, and I need to talk to Zan about something. So now what's happened, you'll see when I entered only her name, it actually immediately brought up some information because we've already had a chat. Now that I've entered the two of their names, it hasn't actually opened up a chat. It's actually only opened, it shows a blank thing here. So now I can go and I can enter some more people. Who else are we going to enter? Let's just leave it at the three of them. Right, so these three people, I need to have a conversation with the three of them. So yes, I'm in a group with them. These are all FET subject advisors. So I am in a group with them. I could send it on the FET component, but I would prefer to send them a message privately. Now I've created this new group that I'm going to use where I've got the three of them. I've got the same functionality here, not exactly the same functionality, because the one key thing that I don't have is I can't have a topic line anymore because the conversations, this is a conversation. So the way the Teams groups it here, it's not going to have the same kind of conversation grouping as you would find in a team, because the expectation is here I've started a conversation already with the three of them. So here I can say, hi, I hope you are well. And I'll just send a message just like that. And I'll explain to them tomorrow why I sent the message to all of them. So here I've sent the message to the three of them. Let me just explain it to them now. This is just an example of right. So I'll just to quickly explain to them why I'm sending this message. It's an example of a group chat. They can feel free to ignore it. Now, what I can do here is I can actually change the name of this group if there's a specific group that something that I'm using specifically. So you can see over here there's a group that we call tutoring, which actually has a whole bunch of the subject advisors that are part of the tutoring group in, and I don't want to have it be called Andre Lucia Rozan. I want to give it a name. So we're just going to rename this to example group chat. Save it like that. And here I've got a conversation with these three people that I can call example group chat. Right. So there we go. There we have all of them. If I realize that, oh, wait, I forgot, I should have added someone, I'm going to add Gilbert to this conversation as well, because I realize that it's a conversation that he needs to be part of. Now I'm going to add him, and he will have access to this chat as well. Let's see if he can respond to this quickly. So we'll show you how that looks. I know I'm asking him to jump around a little bit today. Here we go, and you'll see Gilbert is typing, hi there, and he has responded to me. So there's a direct communication that is happening. Now, again, the usefulness of this is it's not something that I'm going to have to, and it becomes a lot. You can see there's a lot of different conversations that are going on here, but I can organize my conversation. I can organize the way that I communicate about things on Teams a lot better than what we do in different ways. We are very reliant when it comes to chat to programs like WhatsApp, or to applications like WhatsApp, like Signal, like Telegram, these things, and we miss messages. And I know a lot of us sometimes find it frustrating. How do I open a link? It doesn't work. It's not that easy. How do I send this to myself, etc., etc.? Here it becomes very, very easy. Right. Exactly what Yaroslav is saying there. If we can consolidate the way that we move and the way that we communicate and the way that we do all of these things and move to Microsoft Teams, there's huge advantages to this rather than what we are used to. It'll take a while to get everyone to understand and to get everyone on board, but it really, the long-term benefits are incredible for what we can do. Right, so the other thing that I also want to point out with these chats that you need to keep in mind, and this is something that we want to spend significant time on next week, is the fact that there's this files option, and that really is where the key advantage lies, because every chat that you have, whether you're doing it in a team, so let's go to this demo team, whether you're doing it in a team, there is a files tab. So in this files tab, you can actually add files for collaboration. So I can create a Word document that everyone can edit. I can create an Excel document that everyone can edit. I can add files here that everyone can find. We can create folders, etc., etc. The use of it is quite extensive. That's why we don't want to go into too much detail today. But just to tell you that files tab exists in every different channel, and each channel will have its own group of files. And the same applies to the chat. With the chat, I've got the same functionality, files, where I can put specific files into this chat, and everyone that is part of the chat has access to it and editing rights, etc., etc. Now that becomes very difficult when we're using the guest mode the whole time. So that's why we're really looking at the idea of having this closed environment, the WCG schools and the Western Cape, and we'll show you how the two of them interact a little bit later. So the next thing that I think is also important that we sometimes miss, the question with the files tab, yes, John is asking about the meeting. Just to show you here what we've actually got over there is working on MS Teams, where there's a question where I actually go to this chat, not the meeting itself. I can follow the chat that's going on here, and there's a files tab. It is there. We often just don't put the recording in there because people aren't aware that they can go there. But Johnny will definitely add the video there. There's a little bit of a snag when it comes to video sharing on the Western Cape government account. So that's a little bit different, but I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but we will put the recording into the files tab over there. So we can definitely do that. Right. So, and we can add anything in there as well. When you're in a meeting, we're in a session, you want people to refer to a PDF, you can add it to the files tab rather than having it adding it as a link where people break out. But anyway, that's, again, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Just to show you this example group chat, I see Gilbert has actually shared a file, the LAN handover. I'm not going to open it now. I'm not sure what information is in there. It might be sensitive. I can now edit it in Teams if I wanted to. I can open it in the desktop app, open it in my browser. I can download it. But one thing that I can tell you now is we want to slowly but surely move away from this download things concept, that we stay with trying to use the cloud to the full extent that we can use it. It's going to make our life easier. It's going to make our operations easier, etc., etc. And I can share it with the link as well. But I'm not going to open it now, just to show you how we actually added a file. If we click on files, you'll see there's the file. Easy for me to access that way. There's also a tab over there, files, but we'll go into more detail regarding that next week. So what I also want to show you is the calls function that we've got in here. We're very used to the fact that we can call, we can use a team meeting, but we can actually make direct calls to people as well. So if I've got this, I've got only one favorite, it seems. I open it up and I can just quickly hit the call button, and it's going to open up a call for me. Not a video conference, nothing like that, an actual call. Now, if we're using a mobile device, I think a lot of us are used to using WhatsApp to call, but you can use MS Teams to do exactly the same thing. You can actually make calls. Again, it's going to have data costs and not your cell phone minutes that it's going to use. You can make video calls in the same kind of way. And the voicemail function, I'll be honest, I haven't really gotten that to work properly. If you want to call someone that's not in this list, you can just simply click on make a call and then just type in the name. So I see Yaroslav has made a bunch of comments. So we can just, if we wanted to, we can just click call. I'm not going to do that because if I do that, my whole meeting now is going to go on hold, and I'm first going to have a conversation with him and come back. But just to show you how quick and easy it is to make a call. We quite often, what we do is we set up a meeting and then we invite that person to the meeting and then we have a conversation with them. This is a much quicker way to do it, and it'll create a meeting chat automatically, which we can then add files to later if we wanted to. So you'll see how all of these things start connecting when we get to this point. It all comes down to this combination of communication and file sharing and how those two interact to create the more effective use of this. And that is something, if you think about what we've been using Teams for, that we really have not been doing. We've got a lot of us have a lot of files saved on various platforms, Google Drive, for example. We'll show you how we can link Google Drive to Teams next week as well. That can also be done. And then we'll send people a WhatsApp with a link, or we'll send them an email with a link, etc. Rather than just making sure that we put everything in one centralized collaboration space and people know where they can go, a one-stop shop to get everything. That's kind of what we're trying to move towards when we're looking at Teams. But if we do have to set up meetings, let's show you quickly what we can do when setting up meetings to make our meetings flow a little bit more effectively, because it's something that we sometimes struggle a little bit with. Now, there are different ways of doing it, and I want to show you one way that people do it, and then I want to explain to you why this is not necessarily a good way to do it. Right, and that is to set up meetings through channels. This is very often what we do. We need to have a meeting, and then we'll go into a channel and we'll click on Meet, or drop down, schedule a meeting. Either way, we are going to meet. Now, please note, when you do that, it works very well if everyone that's supposed to be in that meeting is already on that channel and is a member of that channel. If they are not members of the channel, then they have a very limited functionality in that meeting. One of the things, for example, that they definitely can't is they can't use the chat. As far as I know, they can't share presentations. I think they can use their mic at least, but they actually have very limited access to a meeting if you're going to invite them through a channel. But if you know that everyone that you want to talk to in this meeting is already on this channel, then this works well, because then you don't have to invite anyone. So if I want to do it this way, I'm going to say schedule a meeting. Here we go. I don't actually have to add required attendees, because when I've got that demo team general, everyone who's in that team is automatically invited to this. And I'm going to say new meeting. I'm not going to add any required attendees. That's not what I want to do. I want to meet with my team, and I'm going to choose a date. We're going to choose Saturday. We want to meet quite early. Let's say, no, we're not going to meet early. We're going to meet Saturday at 4. And I'll say send. Now, when I say send, you'll see it appears in the team channel already, and they will also get an invitation that they are supposed to join this. They're supposed to join this meeting at that scheduled time, and it'll appear on their calendar, etc., etc. But if I want to have other people outside of the channel join, it doesn't work so well. So that's why I tend to prefer, because most of our meetings are not limited to only the people on our channels, we prefer to go through calendar. So if you click on calendar, now just before I do this, I want you to just take stock of what we've actually gone through so far in today's session on Teams, and then hopefully that'll kind of paint a picture of what we're talking about. The first thing we looked at is how do we create a team, and then we spent a lot of time talking about how do we send text messages, good old-fashioned typing, and how then can we send it in a team, how do we send it in a channel, etc., etc. These different ways of sending the messages. Then we looked at one-on-one calling. Now, only now do we get to the conference, the meetings that we are talking about. And you'll see, just looking at my meetings over here, there's a whole bunch of things going on all the time. And I think everyone is very much aware of that idea that there's always a lot of things happening with these meetings. But what we often did with Teams, and that's where Teams is not really coming to to being used to the full extent that it can be used, is when last year, when we all had to go into lockdown, we skipped all the first steps and we went straight to this last step. And therefore, we don't understand the functionality behind Teams before we get to video conferencing. Video conferencing, as I said, is a great tool, but it's not the primary tool that Teams was built for. It is one of the tools, and it has, I think, to a certain extent, become one of the primary tools, but it wasn't one of the primary tools 12 to 18 months ago. It was one of the tools that was built into it. But the primary part of Teams was not video conferencing. It was the actual team itself and communication within that team. That was the main function behind it. So, but with that said, let's look at how we actually set up a meeting. So let's say, for example, I want to set up a meeting tomorrow at 3 o'clock. I'm going to click here. I'm going to just drag there because we know it's an hour meeting, not half an hour meeting. All these blocks are half-hour meetings. I've clicked and I've dragged over there. So there I've got my meeting. I've got it set up. I'm going to say demo meeting. It looks like they've added a new functionality. I know in the past how it worked is you had to invite at least one person before you can actually set up and schedule a meeting. It looks like that's something that they changed recently. But let's just change this demo meeting. We're going to add our usual candidates. We're going to add Gilbert. We're going to add Harriet. We'll add Janine. Right, and you'll see they all are shown to be free because what Teams essentially does is it has a look at their calendar. They're in my organization and it shows me that they're not actually busy at that time. So they don't have another meeting. If they have another meeting scheduled, it'll tell me that they aren't free, they're not available. So here I can use the times that I've set here. I can add suggestions to it. What you can do, what's quite useful, is the repeat function. So I can say this is something that happens weekly. Every Friday from 3 to 4, we're going to have a meeting. And there's also a whole bunch of different options that you can have. You can customize this, of course, where you select it's Friday, and we're going to actually have it run until the first Friday of September. So now we know it repeats once every week. Again, there's a whole bunch of different ways you can change it. We're going to save it. So now I've got one meeting set up for every Friday at 3 o'clock. From 3 to 4, there's a meeting that needs to happen between the four of us. Here I've got my normal kind of things that I can do. I can add a whole bunch of information if I need to, explaining what this whole meeting is actually going to be about. But I'm not going to add all of that. We just have our basic things that we wanted to. I can add a channel that automatically invites people from that channel as well. Here you'll see all the different channels if we wanted to add them. I'm not going to do that now. I'm just going to say send. And now my meeting has been created, the demo meeting. Now, one of the things that Teams does that's a little bit strange is you have to first create a meeting before you can go set up the meeting options of that meeting. So what I need to do now, if I want to set certain permissions in the meeting, and this makes your life a lot easier if you've ever had these meetings in the past. It can be quite a headache when you have to constantly allow people to enter, admit, or if you have to constantly mute people. As you see in this meeting, unfortunately, you're all muted automatically. No one can share their video. No one can add anything other than text messages to this meeting. This saves on data. This makes the meeting flow a little bit more effectively, especially for a large group that we have. If you're only having a meeting with 3 or 4 people and everyone needs to talk, then of course we're not going to follow all these same steps. But if I've got my meeting over here, I've got demo meeting, I can click on it again. And if I go to edit, let's just double click on it. It's the easiest way to open it up. There's a new option here called meeting options, which I can actually now go into, which is not there until you've created the meeting. So the meeting has been created. Now I can double click on it, go to meeting options. The other way of doing it is to actually go into your meeting itself and to change the things there. But again, if I'm going to do that, I'll kick myself out of this meeting, so we won't do it that way around. I'll click on meeting options, and what it does, whether you're in the desktop app, whether you're in the web app, it'll open this up in a new tab in a browser. So if you're not logged in, it's going to ask you to log into your account, your WCG Schools account or your Western Cape account, before you can make these changes. Now, I know for a lot of people, they've got Teams. Teams has been logged in, they use Teams, but they don't necessarily have their accounts logged into whichever browser they use. And then they click on meeting options, and then they're a little bit confused with how that works. That's why generally we actually recommend you rather do it through joining the meeting and then setting it up. That's what we often recommend, because that's the safest kind of bet of doing it. But this way around works as well. Now, just to show you one or two of the meeting options that we actually have. So who can bypass the lobby? That's one of the most useful little tricks. People in my organization and guests. Most of our our meetings are not with our organization only, and very often we don't invite everyone individually as a guest, which means that this becomes a schlep and having to say allow. You can imagine we've got, I think about we had around 120 people in this session at some point. You can imagine having to click allow 120 times can be a bit of a nightmare. And we've done this, so that's why we've learned not to do it again. But here we have a very useful option to say everyone. I don't know why you would really want to say only me, but this makes life a lot easier, just having everyone. And then always everyone just bypasses the lobby automatically. They go straight into the session. I often just switch this one off, announce when callers join or leave. For big meetings, small meetings, I would definitely leave it on if you need to know who's in there. But for the bigger meetings, you just switch it off. And then who can present? And this has happened to me more than once, where people just take over my presentation. So this is a very useful thing to be able to say. People in my organization and guests, specific people, only me. Now I want to show you quickly, if I say specific people, what it's going to do is it's going to give me the option of the people that I've invited to make them presenters as well, or not beforehand. So this is often a good way of doing it, but I have found that sometimes Teams glitches a little bit, especially when we're doing it across multiple organizations. So for example, if I create this session, I invite a teacher who uses the WCG Schools account sometimes, and I make them present it beforehand. Sometimes I've seen in the past that it forgets that. That's why I often just say, who is allowed to present? Only me. I'm the only one who's allowed to present. But as a presenter, I can then I have permission to make other people presenters as well. So I can right click and I can say, make a presenter. In this one, as an example, Gilbert, who's managing the chat for us, I've made him a presenter. So he can turn his mic on, he can say hi, he can turn his video on, he can open up a presentation. I'm sure he won't do any of those things. But he is the only one who actually has the permissions to do that. Here I've got the other options here: allow mic for attendees, allow camera for attendees. So I can switch all of these things off, and I always leave the meeting chat on. So typically what you see over here is how we set up our meetings. Everyone can bypass the lobby, and they're not announced when they join or leave. Who can present? I'm the only one that can present, or I'll have one or two other presenters possibly. And I switch off the mic, switch off the cameras, and I allow the meeting chat, and then you allow for reactions. So if I then I'll save it, and now it has been saved. Now, one of the nice things is, because I've set this thing up to be a series of meetings and not just one meeting, those meeting options apply across all of those. I don't have to go and set them every single time I create a meeting. And there I've got my meeting. Now, in order to get people to join my meeting, I can either go into the meeting and I can ask them to join, or I can just copy this link. And here I've copied the link to the clipboard. I've added it there. And if you remember correctly, let's just use this as an example. We don't want you to go and paste that link. We want you, because that's a very long link, we want you to say, click here to join. We'll select the text and we'll use that insert link option. And I'll just add that link over there by pasting it, insert, and suddenly that, I think everyone agrees, looks a lot better than that. And I can take that away. And no one has to make a bit.ly, no one has to use a, there's lots of tools that does the same thing, right? So everyone can just use that short link. If I'm going to email it to them, whether they click on a bit.ly or whether they click on this, it's going to have the same effect. Right, so that's how I get them to join with this copy link. Once I've actually got my, sorry, we're just going to send an update. I apologize for my colleagues, they're going to get another email now. So once I've got this thing, another way of very quickly getting the link is just, if you click on it, you'll see Teams have added this option where you can just simply go there, copy, and then I've got the link. And chat with participants, this allows you to actually open up a chat like we've got over here before the event starts, which can be very useful from time to time. Right, now the very last thing we want to look at today is the relation between the different tenants that we can use. So I just need to quickly open it up now on the right. Where is it? Okay, there we go. Just give me a second for this presentation to load. The music might start playing again first. Right, so when we have two domains, two different tenants that are supposed to work together, Microsoft Teams does it in a bit of an interesting way, and I think it's important to understand how that works before just diving into, especially this is now especially I think useful for the communication between the Western Cape government tenant and the WCG schools tenant. So what's happening is we've got two tenants. We've got the westerncape.gov.za tenant. All subject advisors are on this. The e-learning advisors are on this. So this is what we use. When we go on Teams, this is our login credential, is the westerncape.gov.za credential. Schools use the WCG schools.gov.za credential. So these are different. Now, normally what we would think was going to work is we're going to set up a team and we're going to invite people and we're all going to be in the same team. There's going to be a kind of interaction between these two. Never mind. Right, there's going to be an interaction between these two, a direct interaction. Unfortunately, Teams doesn't quite work like that. So, and there are reasons why. We're not going to go into the more complicated side of why it works like that, but there are reasons why it works a little bit differently. So what actually happens is for each tenant, they've got something that's kind of attached to it, which is the guest access. So in other words, if you are on a WCG schools account, you can't join a Western Cape team directly. You're going to join it through the guest access, through using the guest access, right? So you go into the guest access and that gives you access to the westerncape.gov.za. And the same applies vice versa. If you're on the Western Cape and you're joining the WCG schools, you go through it via guest access. What that means is if someone creates a team in the westerncape.gov.za using a westerncape.gov.za account, and they invite their teachers who are using the WCG schools.gov.za accounts, they will join this via guest access and not directly via their team. I'll show you how that works in a minute. And the same applies the other way. So typically what could happen is a subject advisor can create a team, or what we've done, we've created a team called ICT Champions, and we've invited all the schools ICT champions on their WCG schools accounts. Now, if they're going to join that team, the chances are quite good they're never going to see it. They're not going to know where to find that team. And the same applies if you're going to create a team, if you're going to create a team for your school and you're going to invite the officials from WCG schools, from the Western Cape accounts, they're not going to be able to join your team, and they won't know how to find your team. But technically, they are actually joining each other and they are finding each other. It's just a little bit different the way that it works. So to understand that, once I've logged in, if I go to my teams, let's go to all my teams. Here you'll see I've got a whole bunch of teams that have been set up. These are all Western Cape teams. Now, if I actually go here to the top and I click on my avatar here, you'll see there's an option to switch between different ones. And if a school were to invite me using their tenant, I'd actually have more of them down here. What that one says, Western Cape Government Schools, and in brackets guest, it actually means I'm going to switch my account because I'm not going to be using this account anymore. I'm going to be using my guest account on the WCG schools. I hope this makes sense. Because when I do that, and I go to Western Cape Government Schools, and I click on this, what happens is it reloads teams and it logs me in a slightly different way. Now, let's just give it a minute or two to just switch. Right, so now I've logged in. Suddenly, if I look at my teams, you'll see I actually have no teams. I think I deleted my one test team. If I go to my chat, there is no real chat. Here's my only chat that I've got. Now, one thing I think is very important to understand is that you don't, please do not send messages. The e-learning team are the only, and the various e-learning teams of the different districts are the only Western Cape, the only district officials that actually have WCG schools accounts. All of us only have the Western Cape accounts. We've only got the WCG schools accounts to kind of experiment with. So typically what would happen is you would invite one of us to actually be part of a team. You would create a school team and you could invite any of the e-learning advisors or the advisors or whoever to be part of your school team, and they will be guests there. You can see immediately here, if you were paying attention to what teams looked like before, there are far fewer tabs. I'm not actually part of a team. I don't actually have the option to click here, join team. I don't have the option to say create team. I've got none of those rights. I've only got the ability to go and view things on this because I'm a guest. I don't actually have the access. I think as Jaroslav has pointed out, you're in someone else's house, but you're not allowed to do anything. You're only allowed to be there. You can't open the fridge, can't turn on the TV. You could only be there. So that's how this works. So in other words, what's actually going to happen is if you are going to be joining a westerncape.gov.za team, say your subject advisor has created a team for English and they want all their teachers to join the team, unless you click here at the top and you switch between the different ones, you won't actually see what's happening on the other team. You won't see the chat messages that are coming through. You won't see the teams that are coming through, etc., etc. So it's a good idea once we start using this more extensively, once this really becomes part of the way that we want to do things. As we pointed out, if we really change our work methodology and move away from something like WhatsApp and start moving to Teams, then this is going to become quite important to switch between these from time to time. To open it up, see what is going on in my current one over here, and then to switch it to go to the other team. So now it takes a while to switch. You can, of course, open it up, both of them next to each other, that you don't need to worry too much about switching these things, have multiple instances running of it at the same time. But I think you understand. So if I go here to my chat, this is still, I've only logged in with my Western Cape account. Suddenly, I don't have the same chats anymore. I've got entirely different chats that are here. I've got a whole bunch of extra options that I didn't have in my. And now, if I, and in this way, we are actually able to interact across different organizations. So there's a closed organization, the Western Cape organization, and there's a closed organization, the WCG schools organization, but these two can interact by allowing guest access across. I hope that makes sense, because this part can be a little bit confusing, but once you start using Teams, it really starts making more sense. And the reason why it is like that also starts making more sense the more that you use it. The reason why they've designed the system to work like that. Now, just to quickly talk about what does guest access actually mean. If you switch to guest access, please note you can't join Teams with a code or with a link, so there's no way of bulk adding people. Bulk adding guests to a team. You can't set meetings at all. You don't have the option to set meetings, just like you don't have the option to create class, to create teams, etc. This is one of the things that's a little bit frustrating. You can't actually send files in private messages. However, you can, if you've got a private message, if you're a guest and the other person is not a guest, they can send files to you still. So it still works in a way. It's a little bit different. It is a bit of a headache that it doesn't allow you to just send files like that. But just keep that in mind. You can join teams per invite. So in other words, if I invite you to my team, you're a guest, you can join it, but I have to do the invitation. And of course, you can send messages in channels. You can do all of the communication. You can still do. If I'm in a team with someone else, I can double click on their face or double click on their avatar, whatever that might be, and you can still send them a message, the direct messages, and you can do the same thing in channels. So you can do all of the communication the same way. You just don't necessarily have the same kind of permissions to initiate the conversation. Someone else's, it's easier for the people in the tenant to start the conversations. I hope that makes sense. Remember, the guest access, the reason why they're limiting some guest access is because we can give guest access to people that don't have the same level of Microsoft accounts as the original tenant necessarily has. WCG Schools has access to some certain elements of Microsoft, while Western Cape has access to some other elements. And of course, there's a lot in between as well. Now, with that said, that pretty much covers what we want to cover in this session. Remember, we've got another session on Microsoft Teams that's happening next week, the same time, Thursday from 3 to 4:30. Please join that session, because then we're going to look at how do we extend Teams beyond just this basic communication tool. I think when we get to that point, we really start showing you what are some of the really powerful things you can do within Teams that really where you can customize it and change it to become an incredibly powerful tool for centralized communication. What I would like to do, and I always like to end off our sessions with this, please make use of our e-learning platform, the Cape Winelands e-learning platform. Over here with the webinars, where it says recorded webinars, this webinar itself, we're going to put it onto the recorded webinars. When you see YouTube over there, what we might do is we might just chop up this webinar into smaller segments that we'll put onto YouTube as well. That's going to be a little bit easier. Gilbert has posted the link over there to our e-learning site. And of course, when you go to the courses, there's a whole lot of things that you can spend a lot of time going through to improve your own teaching practice and to improve your ICT integration. And if you're not sure how to use your WCG Schools account, there's also an instruction on this, how you access it, where you get the login credentials, and some other basic parts of what you can do with it. And of course, you can do more with your WCG Schools account than just using Teams. That's only one of the elements. So